Hey, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Humble Ground. We're just continuing telling stories. And fortunately, the guy to my left, I've known for years, and we've had a lot of conversations and covered thousands and thousands of miles over the years. Joel's story is pretty incredible to me, and I'm excited to tell it. Joel took a different path back to the family farm that most, but I think it gives a really unique perspective on why he did that. If you want to help us out, the biggest thing you can do is share this with people. Tell your friends about it. Subscribe on the website to stay up to date with everything. But without further ado, Joel, thanks for coming on, man. This is going to be a fun one.
Tim, I'm really excited to get on the podcast here. And do they call these podcasts or I don't know.
I don't really know, man. For us, it was a way to just tell stories easily. You and I have talked about in the past documentaries, and documentaries obviously take a ton of work and a ton of time. And so this was a way for us we get to meet people all the time. And so it's like, hey, let's just set up a couple microphones. I don't know if podcast technically is the right term for it, but I guess that's what we're going with. So give me a little bit of backstory. Did you grow up around farming? What was high school and early life like for you, I guess?
Well, I'm happy to jump into that, Tim. Is one thing you know from hanging out with me over the years is I'm not particularly shy, and I don't mind telling a story here. But I think, my story begins growing up like anybody on a family farm in the 80s. We grew up on a family farm. It's multi-generational. My grandpa before that, great-grandpa, all the way down the line. My family immigrated to this area of Marshall County, Kansas in the late 1860s. And they came from Germany to farm, and were in pursuit of a life that they didn't see being possible for them in Europe. With a lot of population density in Germany, the younger sons in any family didn't have a lot of options. The older son was probably going to take over the family businesses or land, and the younger sons had to go find their way. And so that led to a huge influx of immigration into the United States in that time, post-Civil War. And our family was no different. Came from Germany, set up shop in Marshall County, Kansas, bought some property from the railroad, which the government had given to the railroad to fund the Transcontinental Railroad project. So these farmers purchased these lands, showed up, and they, essentially had nothing but hopes and dreams in their pocket, and forged their way from there. The family came through New York, like a lot of them do when they immigrated, by ship, and hitched a train to Frankfort, Kansas, hired an ox cart and a guy to bring them to their area in Marshall County, Kansas, and they dropped them off. And
Quite a story.
They were home forever. This was
here.
it.
Yeah.
And so when I think back to that, and I'm a guy that loves history, I'm really rooted in the tradition of agriculture, or family agriculture especially. And I just can't imagine what it was like for that group to just step off this wagon and say, this is it. This is our path forward. This is our biggest liability. This is our biggest adventure ahead of us. We have to make it from here. And they did. They jumped out and started building a life out of the rough Kansas prairie to do their thing. And luckily, as time went on, they were dedicated to their task. They were efficient, and they made things work through a lot of adversity. And that brings me to my childhood, where my dad and mom were a farm family, had 5 kids, and we all participated in trying to run the family farm. From a really young age, we started out with tasks that seemed age appropriate. Now that I have kids, I look back at some of the things that my mom and dad let me do on the farm, and I'm like, there's no way I would turn my kids loose to do this stuff.
Sure.
But at that time, it was part of it. We all did our thing and jumped in. And I will say, like any kid growing up on a family farm, I think one of my first goals probably was to escape it.
That's fair. Yeah.
It's hard to really put in context, but when you're young and you see your life maybe being different than your parents, and you've got goals outside of that. And one of the things that I gravitated towards was music. And I had some opportunities with that. And I can sit back to, being 12, 13 years old in a tractor doing tillage, out on the farm and thinking, gosh, in 10 years, I want to be on a stage someplace, under the lights and leave this behind. And I wasn't mature enough really at the time to be able to figure my life path out. And I will say that I've got some friends that as we went through high school that were very, very clear and focused on what they wanted to do. I mean, they left high school, went directly to college to get ag business degrees or degrees in agronomy or just generally learn about the practice of farming, went directly into the farming industry, have built great businesses, successful businesses, families that are doing well. I mean, they're killing it. And I'm so proud of them for having the maturity and vision at that early age to be ready to go directly to that. And that wasn't me. I wasn't there. I was kind of like a bottle rocket without a stick for a while there where I knew kind of where I wanted to go, but I wasn't absolutely convinced on how to get there. So I was ready to try some stuff. So I will say that like a lot of kids that grow up around a business, agriculture, or even a family business, there was that time period where it was just like, I'm kind of racing to get out of here and do my own thing, make my own mark.
Yeah.
Just mainly because I probably wasn't mature enough to understand at that time, years down the road, where I would see increased value in what was going on.
Yeah, no, that's neat. It's a different perspective. The history thing's awesome. A quick note on that. So Kev and I travel the country. I feel like every week, and we were out, we go around the Rockies and we go around all these places. And every time, Kev's like, man, I can't imagine what it was like getting on a buggy and a horse and an ox and all this kind of stuff and trying to like cross this and thinking like, what are we doing? So you guys show up to Kansas and it's like, man, where do we even start? You know? And so I thinking back to that, it's like, it's crazy to think about like just what that would have been like, back then.
They took a huge risk. And again, I thank goodness for them being brave enough to jump at that. Cause I'll be honest with you. I don't know if that would have been for me, they came up here, they mortgaged themselves deeply to buy some land to make it work. And from the story I've been told, the first year they didn't, they broke the prairie out, did their thing, didn't raise a good crop. From what I understand, they went to the bank and like, man, we didn't make it, like take it back. And they're like, nobody made it. So like, what good is it going to be to take it back from you? There's nobody to sell it to. Try again. And from that point forward, they had some really good success, but it was such a hard start for anything. And anybody that's ever tried to start a business probably can relate to that. It's a huge leap of faith. It's a huge investment of resources, and you're putting it all on the line. And sometimes not making it is essential to making it in the end too. And so that's another life lesson to take away. But for them to have the vision that this is it. And sometimes you say maybe it's just the fact that the other alternative was so negative that this was better. But thank goodness they did it, because it was important in establishing a long tradition here. And I'm super tied up in the history. I love to hear the stories about the farmers of past generations and the way they did things, and to gain perspective on where we are now with the agriculture programs that we run, the way that we farm, the specific techniques that we use, some of which are old, kind of reinvented the wheel again. And we do stuff that was old. Some of the stuff that we do now is so counter to what they would have done in the past. I think of some of the things that we do now that my grandpa, he'd roll over in his grave if he knew that we did things like, planting into green cover crops. That just was not what they did. And we've learned some things through the years that guide us towards that. And we, again, sometimes fall back on things that we've done in the past and we're like, this was a really great idea. I have no idea why we abandoned it. So there's always that history component. When I worked in the public school setting, I told kids, learn history, because it's not only important to not repeat past problems, but there is the opportunity to take some really great information from it. So no different in agriculture than it is anywhere else. So the history component's important.
So speaking of the school system, again, you have quite a unique path back to the farm. So you went away from the farm for quite some time. How'd you get into school? Like, tell us a little bit about your history, what you went to college for, and kind of that path a little bit.
So we'll kind of jump back into the story of me being a kid and looking for, something outside of agriculture. I was really interested in music. I got the opportunity to start playing music at an early age. My brother was a really great rock and roll drummer. and lost his arm in a car wreck in 1987, I believe. So I'd have been like 7 years old, and he had a huge passion for music, and he started kind of grooming me to be into music from an early age. He'd bring me little listening assignments. I call it. It was like my listening homework. He'd bring over some music for me to listen to, and I'd sit in my room and I'd listen to it. And it was diverse stuff. I mean, AC/DC to John Prine, yeah, everything. And I was attracted to music initially. And he waited till the time was right. And he's like, okay, do you want to play the drums? And I was like, what kid doesn't? You know, I'm
Let's be serious
12,
here.
13 years old. I'm like, yes. And so I was like, okay, he's going to teach me to play the drums, and it's going to be great. And so he brings me some drums, and then that's it. And I'm like, man, I don't know what to do with these things. Like, I don't know how to play them. I don't, pre-internet, so it's like 1993. I can't just like get on my phone and like look at a picture of a drum. I don't even know how to set this stuff up. And so I kind of look at some album covers, like get a Skinner record out and looking at it. I'm like, okay, it looks like that thing goes there. So I kind of put it together and I start messing around, and I find my way to learning how to play the drums. And in that time, I was like, gosh, like a little more guidance here probably wouldn't hurt, but I didn't, I didn't know how to ask for it. And I don't know if he really knew how to give it to me at that time, but I think he held the concept that you're going to develop this and be your own player. You're going to figure it out kind of the way he did too, from nothing. And you'll decide how it's going to work out. And he supported me through that. And so when I got older, now that I'm, 30 years away from that time, I can look back and be like, that was a brilliant approach to it, because it allowed me to develop my own specific style. He nurtured it in the right places, but never showed me how to do it or guided me to it. So music was a big thing. I was really into music. I loved cars and hot rods and motorcycles like any farm kid did. And so, I grew up thinking that like those were going to be my paths. I could be a musician. I played my first show at the age of 13. We did a girl's like 13th birthday party, and we were way in over our head for this. But it paid pretty good, and we played, like all the girls liked us. And I was like, note to self, like, you're not a particularly attractive dude. You're not particularly gifted in sports. Like, this might be the way.
Everybody's got to have their own path, man.
Yeah. So I was like, note to self, music might be the way to get there. So that was always there. And then, fortunately, I got to do some auto racing later in high school, which we had a lot of success with and was really fun. And so, late in high school, I'm like, gosh, I want to find a way into the music industry. I want to find a way into the motorsports industry. How does this work? And then, like, all of a sudden, college is looming. And you and I both grew up in that era where public schools really pushed kids to college.
100%.
That was what was expected. If you're going to be a successful adult, you're going to go to college.
You have to go to college. Yeah.
And I was like, man, I don't know about this. I hadn't put a lot of foresight into this, and I wasn't a particularly good student either. And that was problematic moving forward to college. And I have to tell this story because later in life, I learned how important this was. I didn't get it at the time, but we were sitting in ag class when I was probably a junior, and we were talking about Mustangs with my best friend in high school and some other guys. And something was brought up about the 69 Mustang that had the 390 engine. There was a little bit of overlap in the 69 model year where they still used the 390 and stuff. And I rattled off some production figures for that car. And he's like, why in the hell do you know that stuff, but you don't do good in school? Like, and at first I was like a little offended. I was like, what do you mean? And then it occurred to me that like, I probably do have some acuity for academics.
Right.
I've just been misapplying them horribly. And so that resonated with me, and I've got to thank him endlessly for that, because it was the first time the light bulb went off. It was like, you know what, maybe I could be good at school. And so I jumped on that and started actually applying myself a little bit in school. Who would have thought,
Weird concept.
Yeah. So I started applying myself at school, and I'm like, this isn't really that hard. And it's actually pretty easy, and it's actually pretty interesting. And so now I can look back at that time in life and realize that he told me, like, why aren't you being intentional with the things that you do in your life? Because I was just bouncing off the walls, going down the path. I kind of had an idea where I wanted to go, but I was just waiting for something to take me there. And in that childish conversation as 16, 17-year-old sitting in a classroom, for the first time, it resonated in my life that like, why don't you get intentional about life? Why don't you get pointed towards something
and figure out your path? Yeah,
absolutely. So I was like, man, I probably should think of this college thing, and I hate to admit that my college decision was my girlfriend at the time was going to Emporia State College. That seemed like a reasonable idea. I mean, it was really about all I had really contemplated. And I was like, I could do that, I suppose. I could go to Emporia, and why don't I be a teacher? And it's like, why not? I had a really great history teacher about that time. It seems like that 16, 17 years old was a really formative time for me. I had a really great high school history teacher who was really passionate about the Civil War. And we all really got into that. And really, I mean, we spent like 90% of the school year talking about the Civil War. And we loved it. And I was like, apparently I'm into history. Like why don't I be a history teacher? And around that time, my grandfather died, who I respected a great deal. And my takeaways from my discussions with him late in his life and watching the way that he lived his life was, again, more about being intentional. Why aren't you intentional about the things you do? Can you imagine doing anything halfway and not applying yourself fully? And those are the lessons I took from him, was about, if anything's worth doing, you might as well go all out and go all the way in on it. And so coupled with this kind of new concept of being intentional about life, really applying myself, I was like, I'm going to go to college and be a teacher. I want to be a history teacher. And so I take off for Emporia State, and don't really know how to do college, like everybody that shows up as a freshman.
Definitely.
And so I study pretty hard, and I keep to myself in my room, and I want to perform well because I want to make my parents happy. And so I get done with my first semester, and I got a 4.0, and I was like, man, this is great. I got straight A's. And then I was so excited for my parents to see that grade card, because again, I was not that student at all. And I turned over this new leaf of being intentional, and I get home and they get the grade card over, Christmas break or whatever. It seems like colleges know how to send your grade card right before Christmas to really either make things. And they were happy with it. And then this other light bulb went off, and I was like, oh my God, like I topped out, like I got straight A's. Like, how do I follow this up?
You got a lot more semesters left.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
And so it's like, man, I've got to go for this. The other thing that happened is they started giving me money through the college for these things that I wasn't familiar with, called scholarships. And I was like, this is cool, because I don't want to pay for this. So they hooked me. And so I was like, okay, I gotta become good at academic pursuits. So college really blew by with me playing a lot of music, really being focused on my education, and driving some race cars, which was really fun too. And we had a lot of success with the race programs. And so I've got these push and the pull between the, music industry, auto racing is something that's going well for us. And then I've got this academic pursuit of college. And I'm like, am I getting this figured? Do I have options now? Like, are there some paths forward for me here? And graduate from college with a degree to be a history government teacher, and start looking at the job market. And the reality starts to set in that I'm 22 years old. I'm a young single guy. And I'm like, am I mature enough to go do this? Like,
to teach 17-year-olds.
Yeah. That right now we've all been partying with, my friends are partying with, small town America. If you go to a Saturday night party, there'll be people that are 15, there'll be people that are 55. I mean, and I was like, oh man, I don't know this is the thing. And so I've got this new shiny degree, graduate with honors, astute student. And I'm like, I think I'm going to do the most responsible thing I can. So I moved to Lawrence and joined a rock and roll band.
Perfect. Yeah.
I'm sure my parents are like, what? I'm sure they were baffled. And, but I'll give them an enormous amount of credit. Throughout my entire childhood, they've let me go experience things and have counted on me to make the right decisions. So I'm sure that they were like, this is such a waste of his efforts, but we're going to let him go see. And having that safety net of, if I did have to come back with my tail tucked between my legs and been like, man, this was a failure, they weren't going to be, I told you so, get out. They were going to help me. So yeah, I took off on this journey. I joined a rock and roll band in Lawrence. And that was, I had spent so much effort in college being so focused on academic things that was really my college all of a sudden, where I, started to really socialize and figure things out. So it was a really important time for me. And it was really cool to be in a rock and roll band. They got to tour around and play, college towns and have songs on college rock radio stations. And so we got to tour and do that, and learned a lot about the music industry at that time. And honestly, learned a lot about how over the 4 years that I'd committed to that, I learned a lot about how possibly unsustainable this route was for me. As much as I loved it, is what I really think I wanted to do. Was there a future in being a musician? Because it was hand to mouth through all that time. Even though we were having some success and playing nice venues and doing things, it was sketchy at best, And so during that time, I had this super college degree. So I'm like, I might as well do something with it. So I'd started substitute teaching during that time, because it was a way to earn income when we weren't traveling, And I signed up through Lawrence Public Schools to do substitute teaching. And when we were available, I'd be like, yeah, I can take this call and do this. I go in there and I'm an algebra teacher one day and I'm a shop teacher one day. And during that time, they started to kind of pigeonhole me towards kids with problematic behaviors. They learned that I was a farm kid and I was into rowdy stuff. And so like the auto shop class that nobody wants to be the substitute teacher in, that's where they sent me. The ag classes that nobody wanted to be the substitute teacher in. So they started to point me towards that. And it started to click with me that, like, I think this is my area of education that makes the most sense to me. These kids that are maybe a little off the beaten path are me previously.
Sure.
So it started to resonate with me a bit. And then at about 4 years of touring and playing music there, the reality started to set in that maybe it wasn't a lifetime thing. And the school had offered me a job working as a group home coordinator through Lawrence Public Schools. It was a government funded position to help kids transition in the school setting from group homes, foster care kids who were moving in and out of protective custody or whatever. They were falling through the cracks in the school system. So my job was to be very aware of those students through the group home setting and then coordinate their success at school. And I was like, yeah, this is a really cool job.
What an opportunity.
Yeah. And so I show up the first day. They assigned me to Central Junior High School in Lawrence, which is right across from Mass Street Music. So every day I could look out my window and see Martin guitars over there. And I was like, this is a great office. And I showed up to talk to the principal, and he's like, what do you do here? And I'm like, I'm this group home coordinator. He's like, I don't know what that is. And so he's like, where do you plan to work at? And I'm like, oh my God, like this isn't a really well thought out. Apparently the district hasn't communicated well, because this guy they sent me to work for has no idea what I do or where I do it at. And honestly, I don't either. So they're like, I think one of those kids is out in the behavior classroom. And they had a little mobile unit, which was popular at those times when schools were expanding, this mobile classroom that they had all these behavior kids warehoused in. And I was like, okay. So I go out there with my little briefcase. I knock on the door and this lady answers. And I said, yeah, I told her my story. And she's like, there's an empty desk over there. So she didn't know how to utilize me. I didn't know how to utilize me. So I just took a little time to observe. And watching those teachers and paras work with kids that had behavioral challenges became really interesting to me. And it was essential to my job that I learned those skills, because a lot of those kids in that group home setting, for part of the reason they were in these group home settings, were probably based on behavioral things, family dynamics, maybe not necessarily their behaviors, but behaviors,
the situation that they're in.
Yeah. And so the behavioral thing started to resonate with me. I was like, man, this is it. And I had a really good friend in high school that had a lot of behavioral problems. And we all grew up together and watched him be really unsuccessful. And that was in the back of my mind. And I was starting to get more mature, and I was like, you know what, maybe I'm the guy that can go in and make some change for these programs and students that we don't have to fail these kids anymore. And so I started to get amped up about education all of a sudden again.
That's awesome.
And so again, I'm kind of bouncing off the walls, but I feel like I had pretty good focus. About that time, the band thing was starting to look less likely. I was 26 years old. And I'm like, man, I think everybody's expecting me to be a grown up now. It's about time for like a real paycheck and a regular life. I met my future wife around that time, and it just all started to come into focus that like, maybe it's time to leave the city, do the family thing, get a real job, be a grown up, just, I think that's what people are supposed to aspire to do. And I'll come back to that later. I don't regret any of those decisions, and being a grown up is awesome, but I've been able to avoid it still yet to this day in some capacity. So, we moved back to Marysville. Another intentional decision. I grew up on the family farm. Now I'm starting to get mature enough to realize that that was important to me. My dad's aging. My brother and him were running the family farm at that time. And I was like, this is a perfect opportunity for me to move back into the area that I grew up and assist them on the nights and weekends when I'm not engaged in school stuff, and kind of get my feet back to something I love. I started to miss it after that time. You go through that time as a kid where you kind of resent having to do the things, and then you're like, that was really great, So my goal is I'm going to move back to Marshall County, Kansas, and the mental health agency had offered me a job to be a case manager, and I was like, I don't know anything about mental health, but sign me up. So I jump in that, and again, right into working with students with behavioral challenges. The school sees that is kind of an area of success for me. They hire me away from that. They offer me this job to run a behavioral program. And in typical not being adult fashion, they brought me in, I think it was late June of the summer, and said, hey, we want to offer you this job to run this behavioral program. And I was like, you know what? I'm just getting ready to record a record with some friends. I need about 10 days and I'll get back with you.
Perfect answer.
Yeah. And I look back at that as an adult, and I'm like, they should have checked that.
That should have been
They
it.
should have
Yeah.
checked that box right there. But apparently they were more desperate than I thought. So they waited. And I got done with that thing and with the recording process, which we could have a whole nother podcast about that. It was an awesome adventure. But I'm like, okay, I think I've got that. My stuff's recorded. I feel like my legacy in music may be cemented with that. I can leave that behind. I can go fully focus on that. In that interview, the superintendent, he's like, what do you see your approach to behavior being? And I was young and cocky. I was like, I don't know. I'm somewhere between George Patton and Burt Reynolds, probably, on this, which leaves a lot of room for
Another
interpretation.
perfect answer. Yeah.
So I come back from my 10 days of recording, and I'm like, I'm ready to be grown up. This is it. I'm going to fully invest in being a great educator. We're going to build a great behavioral program for these kids. And we did. Over the next 4 years, the administrative team worked closely with me. They gave me a lot of flexibility, and we created an incredible program of supports for kids.
Awesome.
And this was my new passion. And I loved it. I really liked to look at the kids that were in front of me, and then look back at the kids that I was or that were surrounded by that maybe the school system didn't, maybe give the best shot at, and be like, this isn't going to be them. Not that we weren't successful. A lot of again, my peers did very well, but it wasn't because the school system set them up to do well. It's because they persevered on their own. And I'm like, we're going to figure this out for these kids. And started doing a lot of speaking at behavioral conferences, national behavior conferences and stuff, because we built a system that schools wanted. And like anything, the better it goes, the more you get promoted, the more responsibilities you get. And after about 10 years of that, I don't work with kids hardly anymore. I'm trained.
You lost the ability to do what you love to do.
Well, just through having success, we were moved to situations where now I was training staff, I was overseeing meetings. I still had a small caseload of kids, but most of my time was spent with adults. And again, a very important job, but it wasn't probably where I needed to be. And at that time, the family farm is still going. My dad and my brother are still, working their tails off. Again, they're still aging, and I'm still engaged with them. And a really pivotal moment was we were sitting in the teacher's lounge one day, and the lottery had got really high. Powerball was, several $100 million. And everybody was kind of daydreaming, as adults do. What are you going to do if you win the lottery? And everybody's like, I'm going on a cruise, and I'm going to pay my house off. And it came around to me. And I was like, I think I'd probably, buy some farm ground and play music full time. And that kind of came out without a lot of thought.
Yeah.
It was just the thing that was on, when you're daydreaming about things. And I was back at my desk later that day, and I was like, if you're really going to be intentional about the way you live life, and my goal is to, if I had nothing holding me back, I'd play music and farm. I think I can do it. And I'm an idiot for not pursuing it. because it's right there. My dad had already said, hey, if you get to thinking you want to do this, there's room for you at the family farm. I want you to work with us and learn, before he just dies and I have to start at zero. And I'm like, man, it's out there in front of me again. If I'm going to be intentional and if I'm going to be focused, I'm going to give my effort fully towards something. If that's what I want to do, it's out there. So, that led to some sleepless nights. Hey, I think I might want to leave my really successful educational job that is, while maybe, doesn't pay a ton, is secure and consistent. And I think I want to just go do the family farm thing. And so, and I'll give my wife a lot of credit. She really helped me process through that and help me focus on how are you going to capture your joy. And it wasn't in doing staff trainings and writing behavioral plans for adults to try to implement. It wasn't there anymore. And so I'm like, oh man, this is it. I type up my letter of resignation, because when the term's over, I'm going to the farm. And I remember meeting with my building administrator, and he's like, Joel, you're not really the farming type. Like, have you really thought this through? And I was like, first of all, like, you're not really the school administrator type. That's what I wanted to say. So if he watches this, sorry, dude. But it's true. And how dare you think what the farming type is? And that's part of what is interesting to me about this podcast with you is what is a farmer?
Sure.
Do I look like a farmer? I don't know. Probably not.
And I think that's part of the reason to do this is we get to meet so many people that, whether they are first generation farmers who jumped in. Kevin and I met one that was a first generation. We met numerous first generation ones. They probably never thought they'd be a farmer, but you know what? Opportunities arise, right? Yours, you get out of farming for what, 20 plus years?
Well, I was really away from farming for 10 to 15 years, being away from the day-to-day operations of it. And I'm like, how dare you think you know what a farmer is?
Right.
And so that kind of even made me more steadfast and like, I think this is the right decision. And again, when I was looking at the pros and cons, my dad's a brilliant farmer. He's been very successful. He's got an incredible knowledge base. My older brother, who's farming with him, same story. And I'm like, if I just wait till there's an opening up there, say my dad dies, and it's like, okay, we got to do something here. I need to leave. What service would I be doing to the longevity of the corporation of the farming operation?
Well, and what opportunities would you have missed along the way?
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people, your dad's been doing it forever. And so to be able to learn alongside him and to get to in my opinion, make those memories. Yeah. Rather than, oh crap, like now we have to do something and you're just jumping in it. Now you've got at least the years of experience to where it's not this huge jump, you've worked into it.
Absolutely. And I count myself really fortunate to, again, there are some people that want to get in agriculture that have no background in it, and the barriers to entry are enormous. I mean, everyone that's around agriculture knows how impossible it would be for somebody to decide, hey, I want to farm today. I think I'm going to do this. I mean, that's a 1 in a million chance that somebody's going to figure that out. And you've talked to some guys that have, and that's a great story, but the cards are stacked against them every time.
And I think right now is probably worse than ever. On the farming perspective, where we're at, land prices and things. So to be able to come into something that's already been around for generations, and you have the land and you've got the practices and you've got, things figured out. Yeah. I can't imagine, some of the people we've talked to that start out from scratch, it's like, man, you want to talk about taking a risk. Yeah. Like,
they're the brave people that my family was in 1869.
Right, exactly.
And so, I think there was a lot less barriers to entry in 1860, and maybe that's through my own ignorance. Maybe I don't have a perspective on what 1869 looked like, but I think these people that are trying to do startups today probably face more barriers. But so the cards are laid out, and it's like, gosh, I think I'm going to be a farmer. Like again, and again, the maturity level had showed up. I couldn't have left high school. I wouldn't have been successful. If I would have left high school and said, I'm going to work on the family farm, I would have screwed it up. Just through my own ignorance, through my own youthful exuberance, I would have crashed it. I would have probably damaged my relationship with my dad and my brother. I would have resented it would have been a mess. And luckily I had the foresight at that time even to know I wasn't ready to do this. But now that I look back years ago, I didn't know how unready I was to do that. And again, I talk about my friends that went directly there. Amazing for them to have been able to do that because they had the focus, they had the discipline, they had the goal out front of them to do that. I wasn't that kid at the time. So, now so this is like 10 years ago. So I'm in my, I'm 34 years old or whatever. I've got the discipline to do this now, and I'm excited about it. And having my dad and my brother guide me through the process and show me the things that they've learned and be able to work side by side with them. Again, yeah, the memories that we've made just in this 10 years is incredible, the camaraderie. And I'm so fortunate to have that, because figuring this stuff out from scratch would have been plenty difficult. And so yeah, we jump in with both feet here. We're going to do this thing. I'm going to learn the business side of it, because that's part of agriculture, I think, as far as being grain farmers, that a lot of people overlook is how complex this is. It's not, I need to go out and learn how to till soil and plant crops or whatever. That's a small percentage of it. I need to know how to run this business. I need to know how to market grain. I need to know how to file state reports for our DOT numbers on our trucks. I need to learn how to work with the FSA office on, getting our paperwork turned in on time. It's an enormously complex thing. And I've been given the luxury to learn that alongside with my dad and my brother. And as time has gone on, we've grown together now too. Now that I've been there for a while, we're rethinking our practices. We're innovating in some areas. We're trying new things, and it's the greatest adventure ever. And again, I'm so lucky that I was able to go away from it for a while and then have the opportunity to return, because it's this new perspective, this more adult perspective that is making it work. Where again, I think I would have sunk the ship if I would have went there directly. So we're in a really great spot. My dad's 82 years old right now, still really active farming. I mean, he runs as harder than any of us. He had his appendix out, he had his gallbladder removed right at the beginning of harvest. We ran one day in harvest, and then he was off to the hospital to get this. And he's just itching to get back and go. And so there was a little recovery time from that. But man, he was, right in the game. He's feeling better than he's felt in a long time. My nephew now, my brother that I farm with, not his son, but my other brother, who's an engineer in the Manhattan area, his son works for the family farm. So it's kind of the four of us on day-to-day operations. So we cover a lot of age. My nephew's in his early 20s. My dad's 82, and everywhere in between. And then, my wife and my kids help out with things. My nephew's wife and kids are engaged in it. And it's this really big family operation now. And it's just like, this is as good as it could be. Who would want anything else? But 16-year-old me could never see this eventuality. It wasn't in the cards, and now 44-year-old me is like, I'm the luckiest guy on earth that I get to do this. I still got to play some music. During that time when I worked for the school district, I traveled a lot and played music. But then when I left that school district, being that we're grain farmers and we have more seasonal oriented work, I could really set aside some time to go out on the road and play some shows. And I was able to link up with some great musicians and play some huge venues and do some really cool tours and play with great players. And I'm like, I'm killing it. Like, this is it. This is the things that when I was sitting at that table 10 years ago, what would you do if you won the lottery? I'm doing, and I didn't win the lottery. I mean, I wish that'd be really cool to not have those financial concerns behind me, but everything else I wanted to do is right out here in front of me. And it's all because of being intentional and going at it. Same with you with, coming up with a concept for this podcast. We can talk about things forever and we can hope and dream, but if you're not willing to step towards it, it's just going to be out there in front of you. And there's a lot of people that get hung up in that, where they're waiting for joy to find them, or they're waiting for something to work out for them. And that's a terrible place to be at. You really got to go grab it with both hands and make it happen. And if you're going to be successful in this, that's the mentality I think that that a guy's got to take. It's really hard to accidentally have this work out for you. So
Definitely.
things have been good, but it's been a long road. That the story you asked me to tell, now we burned up a lot of time telling it, but it's critical, I think, in the development of, how do you
your story's your story's great, man. There's a lot of people that are right, that are 16 and say, I'm going to work for the family farm and I'm going to be the next generation and my kids are going to work there, and that's their plan. But it's also good to show people that don't have that plan, that don't have it figured out, that got to the farm in a kind of a roundabout way. And now, I think you're living the dream, man. You get a farm, you get to play music, you get to be around your family and make memories. Like I think people don't get to see that. I think there's that huge misconception again, that farming is so corporate, when realistically there's so many family farms that, again, you guys farm a decent amount of acres. You guys get to do it. You get to make the money you need to make. Yeah, there's good years, there's bad years. I mean, that's farming. But you're right. What is a farmer? I think you said that earlier. I've seen people that grow watermelons to pecans to you name it. Everybody's a farmer. Everything that comes to your plate is by a farmer or rancher in somewhere, right? Everything's grown. And so it's so cool to see the stories and how you got there. I've got a few questions, I guess, related to farming. I'm sure we'll bring up some music memories, as we have a lot of those. But what's the most difficult part about farming for somebody that doesn't know anything about farming? What would you say is your most difficult part of farming, or the hardest thing that maybe you didn't think now being an adult and being on the farm?
I would say maybe that it's the thing that makes being a farmer or being involved in agriculture the greatest, and the thing that makes it be the worst all at the same time is just the diversity in what you need to be able to do. It's not I just need to grow crops. It's I need to market these crops successfully. I need to be an accountant. I need to be a banker. I need to be a machinist. I need to be an agronomist. I need to be that. And so when you ask me what's the hardest thing, I really kind of gravitate towards that is how do I get good at so many things, or how do I at least have a good working knowledge of so many things? We're fortunate in our farming operation that we've got the four of us that are there in daily operations. I think we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and so we complement each other really well in those areas. What's the hardest thing in farming? I'd say I think people don't understand how much goes into it and how diverse of things that farmers have on their plate could be day to day. Obviously things that we can't control, weather, price of inputs. Farming's a weird operation. The fact we can't control the price of our inputs or our outputs. There's not a lot of businesses like that. Typically if you work in production, you can set the price on what you're going to sell. We're out there, dealing with the market. So I can't control the price of things that go in. I can't control the price that goes out. And I also can't control how much of something we make. That's quite a challenge. We're weather dependent. We're dryland farmers. So without rain in the right growing conditions, we're feast or famine. So those three factors are pretty difficult, but I think they pale in comparison to just how much stuff to run a successful agricultural business in any capacity, how many things that you have to address. It isn't putting on a pair of baby overalls and working the soil, or planting seeds that makes a farm go round in today's environment. It's making good marketing decisions, being aware of market trends, working with a lot of partners, being smart with the things you're doing. There's a lot to it. So the diversity, I would say, of the tasks at hand is the most challenging thing for farming. It's the thing that makes it the greatest, and it's the thing that's probably the hardest. So
no, that's great. People don't understand that, which is fine. But I think every farmer you talk to, you get to talking to them, and you start swapping stories, and you start talking things, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I fixed that the other day, and I did this, and I did this," and it's like, man, the amount of knowledge you have to have, or at least the amount of broad knowledge you have to have. You don't have to be an expert. Just to make it work, right? Harvest time comes around. Yeah, it's nice if something breaks to call, the nearest dealership, but that might be 3 days from now, and it's going to rain in 3 days, and so you got to figure out a plan to make it work. And it's so, I think that's a powerful skill that, yeah, it's probably one of those things you take for granted, I guess, knowing as much as you know, and your brother and your dad and your nephew, but you definitely have to be diverse.
And the most important thing about gaining those skills is just mainly not being afraid to tackle them and put yourself out there. And that's, if I had to send any message away, would be that, life is a continual experience. If you think you've got it figured out, you don't. And so you got to have your eyes open, and you got to be looking around, and you got to look for those next opportunities. And I was on a conference call with a company I do some consulting for the other day. And we were talking about some sort of concept. I do some consulting, and I seriously like sit there and smoke a corncob pipe and tell them like farming stories and answer questions. It's a job that I never thought I would come across. It's the coolest job that a guy could think of. But I was telling a story. I was out mowing some brush the other day with our skid loader. We got a big mower, and I made a pass and cut down some scrub brush and stuff, and a rabbit ran out, all the things that happen when you're doing that. And immediately a red-tailed hawk flies over and lands on the tree and sits there. And you're like, where are you going with this story? But the answer is that red-tailed hawk saw an environmental change all of a sudden that happened. Something shifted in their area that they were used to operating, and an opportunity showed up, and he was right there to grab onto it. And I took that away, because you got time while you're out there driving. The best place to think is in the cab of a machine or while you're out working.
Spend a lot of hours there. And
I'm like that. Nature knows this. Like, they know when something happens, if you're not there to capitalize on it, you're going to miss out. And that red-tailed hawk, whatever brain power and capacity that a red-tailed hawk has, I don't know much about birds. I kind of think they're dinosaurs almost. But it had the foresight and knowledge to know an opportunity has been presented. I got to go check this out. And humans sometimes protect themselves from those things. And like, oh, that might be a good opportunity, but what if? That red-tailed hawk didn't ask what if.
You just went for it.
I'm there. I'm going to check this out and have an opportunity.
It's a great perspective.
And I was like, dude, this is, and that's the cool thing about farming, I think, is I get to see that type of stuff happen every day, everywhere. And it's because I've changed the lens that I look through things. Now I'm observing. I could have saw a red-tailed hawk and been like, there's a red-tailed hawk, and just went to mowing. But I'm getting better at reflecting about things now. And I'm like, what does this tell me? And it tells me that, have your eyes open, man. The world's out there in front of you, and you can learn anything. You can capitalize on anything. But if you just sit on the sidelines and wait for something to, rabbit was not going to fly over and climb the tree and get in that red-tailed hawk's claws so he could eat it. That wasn't going to happen. He had to go make it go. And so I'm like, he or she. So I'm like, this is a pretty good life lesson. So, there's a lot to be learned from just looking around. And I think as technology's increased, and we got our phones, and there's so much information there, and there's so much going on around us that's distracting. Sometimes we forget to just look around and say, this is age old, that the human experience, the animal experience of being curious about things. And so don't limit yourself. If there's a piece of machinery that needs addressed and you don't feel like you have the skills, go ask somebody about it, learn about it, figure it out. Will you do a great job at it? Probably not. You'll probably have more learning opportunities than successes. But if you never go for it, there's no learning opportunity ever to be had.
No, that's a great point. A couple more things about farming in general, and again, appreciate you even taking the time to discuss with me, man. I knew you were on my list, and I wanted to make it happen because obviously we have a million great conversations over the years. So I think a lot of people don't realize, or a lot of people see that you live in rural America. That must really suck. They're
really wrong.
And they're really wrong. Like, we get to see the most incredible sunrises. I don't know if you caught the one this morning. Gorgeous. Kevin and I, we get to drive, and Kevin always makes the comment. He's like, I don't know why people wouldn't want to live out here. Like, we were driving, I don't know if we were in Montana. I don't know where we were. And he's like, man, imagine just buying 30 acres out here and living out here. Like, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. I think farming's that way, right? People in the city probably don't care. But I wish more people would come out and actually see what you do. Like, I think and that's some things we're going to try to do. I just had a partnership call with somebody that's like, hey, what do you think about this, right? What do you think about bringing a group of farmers in and a group of people from the city and just allowing them to have conversations about like real life stuff? Like, let's not take what the media says about farmers and all the negative. Let's just let's just put them in a room. Let's just bring some food from, their farm or local farms, and allow people to actually have engagement and positive conversations about it. I don't know. When we have that day, I would like you to come, and I think it would be good. But do you feel like you're super fortunate to live out here and to be able to walk out your backyard and see crops and know that you don't have to deal with the hustle and the bustle of the city? Like, you obviously lived in the city too. And so what's your perspective on rural America and raising a life here, I guess?
It was absolutely the goal for raising my kids, was for us to leave the city and get here. And it isn't just the crops. It isn't the fact that I can walk out my back door and there's nothing but grass and a cornfield out there, and I can sit down and watch the sunset, the most beautiful sunset. Unfortunately, it's going to be in like 4 hours.
This time of year is a horrible time for sunset.
So there's that, but it's not just that. It's the people in these communities that make things. And I'm very fortunate. I'm a volunteer firefighter with the fire department. I'm a volunteer EMT with a neighboring medical agency, and then I work some shift work for Marysville's ambulance service as well as an EMT. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. The people here make this place. The volunteers. We had a huge grass fire a week ago Tuesday that was really dangerous and involved a lot of complex stuff. And to see the response of the guys in our volunteer fire department, neighboring agencies, the local farmers that came out with discs to do things. Everybody's all in here. Do people agree on everything? Absolutely not. There's political differences. There's lifestyle differences. There's all kinds of things. It's no matter where we're at, people are diverse. But when it comes down to, at the end of the day, meeting a common goal, taking care of your neighbor, taking care of each other, making this a good place, this is it. As far as I'm concerned, I've never been any place better. And it's the environment. It's the people. It's the people who have spent the time to study the environment we live in that have learned the lessons from growing these crops by watching, a corn crop 90% made, and the success is right at the cusp here. And then we have a huge hailstorm and wipes it out, and it's failure. And pulling your bootstraps up and moving on from that. The lessons that agriculture have taught the people that live in this community have made this not only a good environment to live in where you can see beautiful things and take in these things, but they've also gifted us with the people that make society great too. Those lessons that you learn, even if you're not involved directly in agriculture, maybe you work in a business. Every business here is involved in agriculture
in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Yep.
You could, housing insurance agency involved in agriculture. Believe me, we buy insurance for things. They are out adjusting. Everything from the medical field, from the fire standpoint that I'm involved in, we serve farmers. We're all farmers. This is an ag community. And this ag community has not only, like I said, given us beautiful scenery to look at and beautiful opportunities to capture the splendor of what's out in front of us, but they've also given us the people that make life great right here as well.
It's such an incredible thing, and I really wish more people could see it. Like Kevin and I brag about it all the time to everybody. Unfortunately, we go out to ag in different places, so like we don't do much work in the city. But obviously, if we fly there and we travel and we meet people and you talk to people, and that's what this is all about, is just telling stories of people in ag. Like we're regular day people. I consider them heroes, and I consider them incredible people because I know where the food comes from and what it takes to grow food. And so I think they're incredible people, and that's all we're trying to share. Is your farmers and ranchers aren't what people make them out to be, because it just seems like they get such a bad rap because they're ruining the environment, they're ruining whatever. They're just hardworking people that want to raise a crop, that want to raise their families and have good values and have good whatever, and bring food to the table in whatever way that is. Obviously, There's a million different ways to do that.
And I agree. I mean, there's good and bad people in any environment. I mean,
100%.
That's there's people in these communities that make life tough on other people. Don't get me wrong. Having said that, though, it's an amazing place to raise kids in a family, to build good values. I'm fortunate with my family. I got a wife that cares a great deal about me, and I care a great deal about her. And we've been able to kind of grow this dream together. I've got the greatest kids. I've got two wonderful daughters that are going to be, powerful women in their own way. They've chased their dreams and goals, and we've set that environment up so they can go at that. And this is the launch pad for that, for me. And again, because I can show them the things that we do in agriculture, I can show them the great things about our communities by being here. And you mentioned earlier, how sometimes there's the media perception, that farmers are just, taking the earth hostage and having their way with it. And I always remind people that the most valuable asset, aside from the people that we have here is probably, the environment. And if we screw it up, that's our livelihood. So I think there is sometimes that disconnect between, we're out just hosing chemicals all over the place to control weeds or whatever, and I always encourage people, like, check into what chemicals cost. Like when I'm buying stuff that costs hundreds of dollars an ounce, I'm probably not just dumping it in the creek for fun.
Sure.
I'm pretty targeted with how to do it. Can I say that agriculture has always been remarkably responsible to the environment? Probably not. We went through some times when just because we didn't know any better, we screwed things up. And I don't think there's any industry or any human population that's ever existed that hasn't screwed things up because they didn't know better. And so the real wrong would be if we just continued to do that and just been like, no, we're just going to do that. We've learned a lot. I think back to being a kid. I don't know that I ever saw a bald eagle until I was in my 20s here, and I see them all the time now. And that goes back to some herbicide chemical things from the 70s. It took some time for things to rebound. We screwed it up. We absolutely did. Were we misled by the people selling us stuff? Possibly. Were we blinded by our own ignorance with what we were doing? Possibly. Did we correct that? Absolutely. And now things are coming back. I see bald eagles all the time, and I stop and just stare at them and wonder occasionally. Just one small example of how, we had some practices that didn't work out. But today, with as expensive as things are, and as in tune with the land as we've become, we're not trying to wreck it. We're not trying to screw it up. I promise you. And we've moved to doing a lot of cover crop programs and stuff. I think back to, we were talking, specific farming practices. Cover crop's pretty new to us. We're like 5 years into our cover crop experience. And when I started up at the farm full time, say 10 years ago, I'm like, I'm not a cattleman. This cover crop thing that doesn't mean anything to the grain farmer. I don't want, we're not going to deal with that. Yeah. And we started to experiment with it, and we started to learn about, the erosion protections we're getting from it, from the weed suppression we're getting from it, from the benefits for, the microbial growth in the ground and the overall soil profile health. And, now this is going to be, I think, our fourth year where we're 100% planting green into our planting our soybeans green into cover crop, which, like I said, 10 years ago, I was like, that's a cattleman thing, they just needed to graze and stuff. And so our perspective changes. We're always looking for, what can we do to become more efficient? And again, that specific process there, I'm not out. It saved me a herbicide pass. So if we were doing something that, wasn't as good for the environment with the herbicide, we've eliminated that pass. We've eliminated, Sure. some situations there. So we're very cognizant, and we're concerned about these things, because again, it's our livelihood. If I screw up the, however many inches of topsoil Paul Harvey said we had here, and goof it up by being dumb, this ends with me. Right. And this thing
that's a big deal. Yeah.
Since 1869, I don't want to be the guy to wreck the boat, So we're absolutely invested in doing it right. And I think there's becoming an increased focus in agriculture on that right now.
Yeah. A couple more things and we'll get out of here. I know you got stuff going on. Well, speaking of hair, why grow the beard? What, and I'm sure you've got a good story about, working on a piece of machinery and getting oil in it, or getting it caught in something, or ever since I've known you had a good, when I met you, I'm going to guess it was more of a goatee, and that obviously has evolved over the years. I feel like, you probably never be able to cut that thing.
It has become a thing, I guess. I think I've had this particular beard for like 10 years now. I would love to give you like a really macho story about why I grew it, but I don't have one. What it actually came down to, I was actually working in the school system around the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, 2010. And I decided we were working on some Civil War stuff, and all Civil War generals had great beards. It was a time period where beards were in style in the 1860s. And then by, being out like fighting a war, you probably weren't super focused on shaving. So those guys threw great beards. And I'm like, I'm going to grow a magnificent beard for the entire, 5 years of the 150th Civil War anniversary. That's going to be my thing. And this sounds pretty nerdy when I say it like that, but it's true. So I started growing a beard. I got a pretty good beard going, and I'm going to say probably 11, 12. So a couple of years growth. I was driving my Jeep one time and it kept blowing up over my eyes. There's kind of that dead air space in a Jeep, and it kept blowing up over my eyes. And I drove in my driveway and I walked upstairs and I shaved it off. And I was like, yeah, that takes care of that problem. And I was laying in bed then that night. I was like, I guess I could have tied it up. So I was like, well, it's kind of late now. So I think I went without it for another year or so. And then I was like, I'm just going to grow this beard. And there was never I didn't know if I could grow a long beard or any. I was out there. And so I took the most important first step. I just quit shaving and kind of let it work itself out. And I don't trim it. It just is the way it is. And so I just left it alone and just took that out of my routine. Cause shaving's not really all that fun anyway. I have a distant memory.
See, you're being more efficient. You're saving time.
Yeah. Right. And so just let her go. And then it started to become kind of a thing, I guess, especially in the music scene. It was kind of an identifier, I guess, for me. And it's something people love to talk about. I don't go anywhere that somebody, how long you been growing that, or how do you do that? And it's just a thing. So
it looks great, man.
I grow it,
great.
And it's there. It's a terrible pain. It really is. It's always wants to get in everything. I have to tie it up. I work around things that spin. I work around things that are greasy. I work around things that are on fire. It's really problematic. And I guess it may be that side of me that shows poor judgment on really proceeding, but it's just like, no, I'm going to figure this out. So, there's been a million times when I've come home, just this spring, we were on a really massive wildfire and we were fighting that. And I came home from that, and my respirator obviously doesn't seal well because of the facial hair. And I was like, this thing's dangerous. I'm going to shave it off. And I'm like, I need to go to bed and think about this first. And I talked myself out of it. Again, my youngest daughter, she's 14, and I really feel like her memory of me not having a beard it doesn't exist. And actually, when she was really little, she would tell people that she actually grew in my beard. We hadn't got to the birds and the bees at that point. She didn't understand the process. and much to her mom's chagrin, that, it was, instead of her carrying the load for 9 months and doing all the terrible things that happen to your body when you're pregnant, Josephine was pretty well convinced that she just like sprouted out of my beard. And so there's that. So I took a little heat for that for a while, but
I bet. No, Joel and I used to play for years. Joel's a phenomenal drummer, as we've heard. I'm a subpar acoustic player and singer, and Joel and I traveled the country, for the better part of 5-6 years. It's probably longer than that. Heck, I don't know. In our peak, probably we're playing 80 shows a year. I don't know. Working full time. Joel's was farming. And so we covered so many miles and we met so many people. And we've got a lot of memories. A lot of them we probably can't talk about. But the cool part was we played in small towns across the Midwest. And every place you played, there was always farmers, and there was an ag always came up. And so, we've been talking about documentaries and stories for ages. And so it's fun to kind of see it come alive. So I knew that you had to be one of the people in these first episodes. So I appreciate that a lot, man. I want to ask one more question before we get out of here. And that's just what's the future look like? For the farm? What's the future look like for you?
I would love to say that I had a clear vision of that. And I'm also kind of at ease that I don't have a clear vision of that. Agriculture's tenuous. Commodity prices are low right now. Inputs are really high. There's a lot of challenges ahead of us right now. And when I tell those stories, when I talk to people and say, gosh, commodity prices are seriously, they're at places where they were in the 70s in some cases, and our inputs are considerably different than that. I look at our own family farming operation, and I just think about, the amount of money that we spend on simple things like health insurance for our people, incredible dollars. But they're necessities. And I look at those challenges, and you can get bogged down in that and say, well, we're facing insurmountable challenges that no one's ever seen. And then I back up to the perspective of, what would my forefathers say when they got off the wagon and stood on a piece of grass in the middle of nowhere? And did they think their challenges were insurmountable? I'm pretty sure they did. And they probably would love to have the challenges that I'm faced with now. So it's about perspective. There's a lot of challenges out there, environmental challenges, economic challenges, shifting weather patterns, governmental regulation, changes to the way we do practices. There's a million things that can get out in front of us, but I don't lose a lot of sleep about them because we've always figured them out. They figured them out. My great grandparents figured them out, and everybody along the line has. We've had missteps. We all have. I think everyone, if they're being honest about their life, is definitely missed the boat a time or two, and it's not about that. It's about how do you respond? How do you move forward? How do you adjust course from there? And so with those tools, I don't know, but bring them on because we're here for it. My goal is to continue to have this operation viable for my kids and their grandkids and whatever comes down. So my goal is to position us best to do that. And the way we get there is just going to be by doing the same things we've always have done, being reflective, being responsible, looking at things through a lot of different lenses and making decisions moving forward that best suit us. So the big challenges out there, there's plenty. And anybody that runs a business, especially in the environment we've been in the last 5-6 years, maybe, have been burdened by a lot. But at the end of the day, it's our job to figure it out. It's part of the great challenge. I'm in for it. So we'll figure it out. We'll make some missteps. We'll have some great successes and probably everything in between. We'll capitalize on those successes. We'll try to minimize our missteps, and we'll move forward and tackle whatever it is.
That's awesome, man. No, that's a great way to end. I just want to say thank you so much for being on here and supporting me all over, over the years. You've always been a big supporter of mine, and appreciate you even answering the call on this one. So with that being said, that's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for watching, listening. Please like, subscribe, do whatever, sign up for our newsletter so we can keep telling these stories and bring them to you. And again, thank you to all farmers and ranchers for everything that they do.